Thank you. This is really such an honor, and I am a little emotional. I just want to take a minute to kind of appreciate where we're at and appreciate the work that has gone into this project, and to appreciate, the collections that are here, the collections that are below us, and the labor and the love that people have shown to make this happen. In terms of my formal thank yous, I want to thank Howard University. Let me get this situated here. Okay. I want to thank Howard University Libraries, Dr. Charles Muse, Ms. Joellen Elbashir, Lopez Matthews, McKinney Johnson, Adrena Eiffel. Can you wave so there's Adrena. Hi, Adrena. Who really helped, kind of get everything together, grease the wheels, made this happen. So thank you, Adrena. I want to thank Penn State Libraries, especially Athena Jackson, who co-sponsored this event from her Huck Chair Endowment, the Center for Humanities and Information, and I also want to welcome some of our special guests. We have Matthew Francis, is he here? From Penn State Libraries. Jennifer Cervantes, is she here? Where's she? From NEH, and our students from the University of Delaware. There we are. And from Penn State. Okay. And from Howard University. Okay. So we got, and I want to also thank my sister panelists for joining me in this event. That was supposed to be behind me the whole time, but here it is now. So. In 1958, Anna Julia Cooper penned this letter to the Afro-American newspaper. It is a notice that she is contributing $279.65 to be deposited at interest to the National Savings and Trust Company in honor of her 100th birthday and for the future publication of her essay, The Ethics of the Negro Question and the Negro's Dialect. In the letter, Cooper, writing at 100 years old, asserts herself once again as the tenaciously active agent advocating for the publication of her writings and her words. With her characteristically meticulous hand straining to maintain a vestige of its former self, Cooper, across inconsistent line breaks and with tremulously drawn letters, reaches out to posterity in a final effort to steward into print her writings on race, gender, and culture. Despite her efforts, however, these essays lay dormant in the archives until 1998, when they were finally published by Charles Lemur and Ismay Bond in A Voice of Anna Julia Cooper. In the last 4 decades, selections from Anna Julia Cooper's most well-known work, A Voice from the South by a Black Woman of the South, have been reprinted and anthologized in collections over 36 times. The prevalence and accessibility of her work, however, belies the arduous history that characterized Cooper's attempts to secure a public voice in print. For instance, just 2 years after the publication of A Voice from the South, Cooper is said to have had, quote, another book on the way. However, we know virtually nothing about this second book, and instead it exists in Kevin Young's terms as a shadow book, part of the vast unwritten that threatens us all, the Black literature denied existence. Thus, given the complex history of Cooper's publishing efforts, the 1958 letter is perhaps a more suitable emblem of her publishing career than are the dozens of discreetly circulating excerpts from her 1892 collection. In my brief comments today, I want to talk about what it is we learn by revisiting Cooper's larger archive, by reading the shadow books that haunt her published writings, and by finding new ways to recognize and read work we might have overlooked before. The first example I draw is from my own work on Cooper scrapbooks, specifically, and some of my students have heard this before, that's okay, specifically her scrapbooks from 1931 to 1940. The scrapbook contains dozens of articles, essays, notes, and letters that Cooper published in the local black press, with many appearing originally in Washington, D.C.'s black newspaper, the Washington Tribune. In the articles collected in the scrapbook, Cooper addresses many of the issues that have been important throughout her career in writing: educational policy and pedagogical practices, community self-determination, the intersectional politics of racial representation, the significance of race in addressing labor issues, and the complex machinations of power and oppression. Through her overt statements in and to the Black press about its role in challenging racial oppression and promoting race and gender equality, Cooper utilizes Black newspapers and periodicals as a forum for dialogical exchange and asserts her right to participate in this public discourse. By collecting her articles in a scrapbook, Cooper also creates a material record of her assertion of a public voice. As Ellen Gruber Garvey notes in her study of American scrapbooks, for many 19th century women activists who created scrapbooks of their own writings, these texts constituted a record of extended dialogue about women's participation in the public realm, recording an extraordinary assertion of selfhood for women and their claim to act in a public arena. Thus, Cooper's scrapbook not only records her later statements about the role of the press alongside her continued critiques of race, class, and gender issues, but also documents her continued role as a public intellectual and activist. Additionally, her textual practice demonstrates a radical engagement with and commentaries on print culture. In the material composition of the scrapbook, Cooper adopts what I'm referring to, following Sarah Dillon, as a palimpsestic practice through which she engages and rewrites the existing masculinist capitalist narratives. So, for example, instead of pasting her articles into a notebook or some other receptacle created specifically for that purpose, Cooper cut and pasted her 29 articles, letters, and notes into a published book with the existing text of the book covered in large part by clippings from Cooper's own writings. The identity of the book, The First 50, 1889 to 1939, written by F. Lawrence Babcock and published by Standard Oil Company in 1939, is discernible only by the front cover. The original text of the book, in which Cooper chose to archive her articles, related a triumphant narrative celebrating the rise of Standard Oil in its first 50 years. Images of drilling rigs, oil wells, service crews, and refineries, and short blurbs about improvements in the refinery process and the role of gasoline in propelling the automobile industry are truncated and taken over by Cooper's own writings and words. Over and above the celebratory narrative of industrial capitalism, Cooper pastes her articles, weaving an alternative narrative critiquing the mass production ethos of the machine age while expounding on the impact of discriminatory practices on local Black businesses and lauding the importance of service to the common good and community self-determination. One example from the scrapbook illustrates both the ideological and compositional intervention Cooper makes. On one page of the scrapbook, Cooper pastes the second half of an article she wrote responding to a recently published study titled "The Negro in Washington" by A.H. Shannon. In this article, Cooper implores her readers to take a more rigorous review of Shannon's book, which Cooper argues is designed to stir more bitterness and work a deeper, more enduring economic hardship than the most brutal insults. In one of the excerpts she includes, she quotes Shannon's argument that for every Negro trained as a skilled artisan, a white skilled artisan, actual or potential, is displaced. The second excerpt expounds upon the same theme as the first. Shannon's assertions, however, enter into an uneasy relationship with the images of the base text that are not covered by Cooper's article. Images of white workers, of only white workers, engaged in various jobs related to oil production and refining. The juxtaposition of the textual and visual narratives here create a dissonance that troubles both narratives, calling into question Shannon's claims of displaced white workers while making visible the privileged place of white workers in this particular history of racialized industrial capitalism. Through the resituating of her articles in the scrapbook, Cooper lays claim to a male-dominated space, co-opting that existing text, rewriting the dominant narrative, and creating an archival record of her own oppositional perspective. To understand Cooper's compositional logic and to recognize Cooper's scrapbook as another book, a shadow book as it were, within her larger opus, means that we must see the scrapbook as a book. To encounter her articles as two of the 29 that are reprinted in the Lemert and Bond edition, for instance. So here, I'll pause here, as Gabrielle was saying I did. So you can see in this, so the first slide, you could see the articles that Cooper pastes over the base text of the scrapbook. In the next slide, you can see how they're kind of juxtaposed with the white workers in the background, and each one of those articles kind of critiques different aspects of industrial capitalism, of mechanization. So you can see the kind of narrative that she's constructing there. So to encounter her articles as 2 of the 27 that are reprinted in the Moorland-Spingarn edition, for instance, as discrete, standalone, individual essays gives us no sense of the larger context Cooper constructs in her scrapbook or the place that they occupy within Cooper's self-constructed archive. Publishing Cooper's scrapbook in print form presents difficulties that a digital format can more easily overcome and presents possibilities to interact with the text in new and exciting ways. So you can see here, the one on the right is just the article, one of the articles that would have been pasted in the scrapbook, and the other one shows how you actually see the article once it's part of Cooper's scrapbook. So what I'm arguing is that when you actually have a chance to see the scrapbook as a book, you realize that these are not just discrete articles, but that Cooper actually is creating another text. And this is how they appear in the Moorland-Spingarn edition. And so again, you have absolutely no sense of the way in which these articles are interacting with the larger text. And so one of the things that we're really interested in addition to digitizing the scrapbooks, is to kind of move from here and to start to think about what else can we do, right? So we have this opportunity. I think the scrapbooks show us what can digital formats do. You know, can we lift those articles and see the base text? You know, this is the base text that she used, and get a sense, what did she choose to cover? What did she choose to leave visible, right? Can we create 3D imaging? Can we pick up the book and look at it? And so these are the first steps that this digitization project makes possible, and some of the things that we're imagining for some of the next steps. So in addition to inviting new ways to read Cooper's archive, the digital collection also expands access to Cooper's larger body of work, to materials that go far beyond her published writings and that help us better understand Cooper's intellectual process and the challenges she faced. In other words, they help us gain insight into the process of Black women's intellectual history. To illustrate this, I draw my second example from the classroom. At the beginning of the semester, Catherine Bell and I asked our respective classes to explore the digital archive and to select 3 to 4 items about which they would provide a description and brief commentary. One of Professor Bell's students, Meredith Lafrette-Coutu, selected 4 correspondences regarding Cooper's dissertation and subsequent defense at the University of Paris-Sorbonne. Translating these correspondences from French to English, Lafrette-Coutu reconstructs a critical context for understanding both the intellectual and material challenges Cooper faced as a 66-year-old Black woman working to become only the 4th woman from the Black woman from the U.S. to earn her PhD. And looking at just the first letter, we learn that Cooper was unable to gain access to the French National Archives until quite late in her doctoral research. We also learn that Cooper had a much broader vision for her work than what was eventually approved. Her original title was The Attitude of France Concerning Equality of the Races, and Cooper was seeking information on immigrants in France from Japan, Africa, and India. As later documents show, however, Cooper's topic was rejected as too vague. And 1 month later, her topic would be added to the register for the University of Paris under the title, The Attitudes of France on the Question of Slavery Between 1789 and 1848. Showing, and I just have to pause here because Cooper, she pays them back for this. So they, when they give her, so she writes her dissertation, she goes to Paris, she defends it, and then they tell her, so for your oral defense, when you come, you have 2 weeks to prepare your oral defense, and your question is U.S. attitudes towards slavery from like beginning to present. And so she writes back like, you know, I feel that your question is too vague, right? So, okay. So no good deed goes unpunished. showing that the attitudes of France on the question of slavery between 1789 and 1848, showing that Cooper originally was not just interested in France's attitudes towards slavery in the colonies, but wanted to examine the role of immigration and France's attitudes toward race within the metropole as well. I give this example not just to show the opportunity this digital collection allows for charting how Cooper's intellectual projects took shape within the confines of various material and intellectual strictures, but also to show what kinds of scholarship is facilitated by increased access to this collection. Lefret Coutu, a grad student, may or may not have had funds and access to get to the Moorland-Spingarn Research Center, and she may or may not have found her way to the 4 French-language correspondences about Cooper's dissertation. But her research in the digital archive allows her to recover and introduce critical insights about the process of Black women's intellectual history. Lefret Coutu's work tells us about the networks Cooper cultivated and the broad webs of socialities in which Cooper and her work moved. It shows us the restrictions Cooper faced and the expansive and tenacious response she mounted to challenge those limitations. I will close with just one more example from the archive. Like the first letter, I believe this last document is representative of Cooper's engagement with the restrictions and limitations she faced throughout her life. It is Cooper's response to a 1930 survey by Charles S. Johnson. In it, Cooper provides important biographical information, shares her attitude on Black education, and provides an accounting of her educational history and attainments. Cooper's answers to the survey have been extracted to provide information, facts, and details about her life, and have been excerpted and incorporated into various biographical accounts. However, Cooper's completed survey is itself a document that tells us, I would argue, just as much about Cooper and her unwillingness to be bound by the forms that would try to contain her life in writing. In her response to question number 65, have you a racial philosophy, and can it be briefly stated, after all? It fills all the available lines and then wraps around to the back and covers the entire back side of the page, concluding with her statement, "To me, life has meant a big opportunity. I am thankful that my work has always been the sort that has beckoned me on, leaving no room for blasé philosophizing and rebellious resentment, with just enough opposition to give zest to the struggle, just enough hope of scoring somewhere among the winners to keep my head unbowed, though bloody." That Cooper's archive has become available. Should I stop? So you can see on here, I just love it, right? So that last slide there, where you see the kind of zigzag line running down the side, that's her brief response to question number 65. That Cooper's archive has become available to a national and global audience of students and scholars through the work and dedication of the staff at the Moorland-Spingarn Research Center means that we have the opportunity to read more broadly in her larger body of writing, that we have a chance to access her literary production beyond what was published in the bound book, a critical step for accessing the work of 19th century Black women writers especially, who were so often marginalized in both Black and white mainstream publishing, and that we have a chance to learn about the process of Black women's intellectual production. It also means that we have a chance to explore what this work says about our current moment. To re-examine Cooper's activism, her efforts to bring equal attention to the precarious place of Black women and girls and the sexualized violence they faced resonates, for example, with the Say Her Name movement. Her community advocacy, her efforts to challenge things like barber exams, which she knew were just another way to stymie the livelihood of Black barbers working in Washington, D.C., is not unsimilar to efforts to get women in Tennessee to get a license for braiding hair. And her effort to preserve Black women's history in her privately printed 2-volume collection of Charlotte Fortune Grimke's writings, for instance, is not unlike our efforts today to preserve and study Black women's history. We look back, as Cooper would say, not to become inflated with conceit because of the depths from which we have risen, but that we may learn wisdom from experience.